It's also an exercise for us. It's also sort of like an exercise in simplifying the designs, because when you look at the embroidery is very intricate and very it's very detailed. But when you translate that into knitting, you know, if you would have done it exactly like the embroidery, you would have a huge panel, because, you know, to get in all the detail, all the intricacy, it takes a lot of space. So it's also about simplifying it, but still bringing the spirit of the tradition forward. But it's always about keeping it simple and making it doable for, you know, within knittings. It's kind of like translating from one craft to the other.
And also think that the way we like to put the patterns is also kind of influenced by the folk costumes and our traditions, like how you have black parts next to a lot of colors, and on the sweater you have the white on top, which is kind of the opposite of what you have on his Setesdal sweater, where the white part is on the bottom, and then you have the black and white color work. So it's like, I think we always find a lot of inspiration in the traditional knitwear in Norway.
You take it, you turn it upside down, you break down the patterns, you build the patterns up again. Then you think about things like, do I want to do color work while I'm doing the raglan sleeves, for example, and things like that. You know, I mean, it looks more complex to knit than it actually is, because the thing that is the most the thing where you have to take most attention is if you're knitting color work and doing the raglan at the same time. But we've actually removed that for you by weighing down the patterns, so the raglan part is easier.
Less than the color work on the raglan, more around the upper body.
Yeah.
So you can have a break when you finish it.
When you start the white, you're done.
Yeah, I've seen versions of this that have the neckline is done in the color bands, right? Like this.
Yeah.
But maybe if you're just craving one last burst of color, you can get back in there. But I do love this idea. The raglans are your sort of peaceful conclusion to this project. All right, so the sweater is amazing. Here we have, this is a category that I believe you all own, which is the fairly whimsical neck warmer category of knitting. I think you guys are amazing at coming up with design. I would say this one's a very calm one compared to a lot of what you guys do in the neck warmer category, would you say?
Yeah, we call them dickies. I think it's also it's a very cute word. We actually started designing these when we were in the fashion industry, and we had these buyers from a really nice store in Los Angeles that picked up a lot of the neck warmers, and they told us they were called dickies. So it's a very sweet, cute word, and it reminds
very retro. It's very retro.
And it reminds us the dickie is really part of our childhood. It's also culturally something that everybody in Norway that is our age has a relationship to, from being dressed in the mornings to go to daycare or school as a child. So it's always very nice to embed those childhood memories. And sometimes when Norwegians, they see our work, they get this aha moment, you know, this very nostalgic. This reminds me of my grandmother's cakes when I got home from school, because I used to wear a dickie all the time. That's a very nice kind of memory to embed in a design.
And normally a lot of the dickies have a flap in front and back, and we started to do these yoke dickies because you know, there's a lot of garments now, sweaters with only the pattern on the top.
Yeah.
So we were thinking, why not make a bunch of dickies, and you can use you have a black dickie with a pattern, use a black sweater under, and just
change it up.
You can have hundreds of sweaters wearing a dickie, because when you put it in a jacket, it looks like you have a sweater, and it's easy to take off if you wear it in a warm place. Go to a restaurant and it's warm, rip the dickie off and you're fine.
Oh yeah, we think of this as a yoke sweater without the pesky sweater part, you know. Get all the fun without the, you know, the sleeve.
You don't have to do the, you know, put the stitches on holders for the sleeves or any of that business.
Okay.
You know, and it's also nice if you have like a layered look. If you're wearing a nice shirt or a blouse, and then you have a jacket, and in between that you have this dicky. You know, it creates a little bit of layering there with some interesting details. So it can be worn. You know, when we were children, it was for warmth and protection, and you wouldn't put a scarf on a child because, you know, that could be potentially dangerous. So it was for protection against the weather, but also a very easy garment to put on a child. But as an adult, it can be stylish and it can be styled. It doesn't have to be protection anymore. It can be all about a look. And it's also quite fun to knit because when you start it, you've already, you know, you don't have to do the, as you said, the whole part which is underneath. So it's kind of very a quick knit as well.
Yeah, and this one also had the small hearts.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the motif, which I'm sorry you can't see that clearly. It's very simple.
Because we found a picture of my grandmother from my parents' wedding, and my grandmother was wearing a Setesdal jacket. And when we looked closely at the pictures, we saw that she had changed the O in the X and the O. So you see the X and the O on this one, but the O there was a heart.
Oh.
So we have done a sweater before, also inspired of what we saw on my grandmother's jacket. So that was her version of the Setesdal sweater. So that's why we put hearts sometimes.
And it's very interesting because in the past, I mean, even in the past, these sweaters were traditional, but it didn't necessarily mean that they had to look a certain way. People would do variations on the designs. So the X and the O could absolutely be an X and a heart, and it wasn't wrong to do that. I mean, it was all acceptable and accepted. There's nobody coming to say you can't do that. So it's also nice to see if you're able to see a collection of Norwegian traditional sweaters, all the motifs, they're always the same, but they're very, you know, there's a huge variation in how they are interpreted, which is really nice.
It's nice to have the proof of that in the old photos.
Yeah, it is.
That people have always used their imagination when they're making these things.
And then, for example, the one Arne has that he has been showing, because it's part of the folk costume, that one kind of sort of froze 100 years ago when the folk costumes they came at a time when there was a national romantic movement in Scandinavia where the Scandinavians were looking for their own identities in their own countries. That's when the folk costumes became a big deal in Norway. So his sweater is kind of frozen in time. And now traditionally, it looks like that always. But if you look at before that, they would have been so different one to the other that it is nice to see all that variation for sure.
Fascinating. I'm trying to think if there's anything similar to that in the United States, Kay. Can you think of something like that? I feel like
I mean, I think it's only like I grew up in the Midwest where there are lots of Scandinavian people, and you know, the Scandinavian descendants of, you know, Swedes and Norwegians and Danes would wear their, you know, national costume. And I think it probably degraded over time, you know, that, you know, there was no longer the direct, you know, the direct person who came over to tell people what to wear. But I remember seeing kids, you know, dressing up in their national costume, and it was always something Scandinavian.
Our impression of the Norwegian Americans, or actually the Scandinavian Americans, is that when they came to the USA and Canada, that's what they brought their traditions to your continent, and then I think that they were very meticulous about keeping them. So things may be a little bit more traditional with the Norwegian Americans in the US today than what they're in Norway. Because in Norway, they evolved more, whilst in America, people were kind of holding on to the identity that they had brought from the old world, I think. It's very interesting to see.
Wow.
Yeah, we went to the museum. It was in Decorah.
Yeah, the
Vesterheim Museum in Decorah in Iowa. And we saw some things in that museum that we haven't seen in Norway.
Yeah, very interesting.
So that's like all things that were brought to America, and Yeah, it's interesting because it's the same. We went to a flea market in Brooklyn once, and Brooklyn was very Norwegian in the old days. Like all my family who went to America from my mother's side, they went to Brooklyn because that's where you went if you came from the south of Norway.
Yeah.
And we went to this flea market and we found a lot of strange things from Norway we haven't seen in Norway.
Very bizarre.
So that was really
They took them with them, and
cool. They took it with them. We even went to the archives in Vesterheim and looked at the old knitwear. So we took a lot of pictures. That was
Very
also
interesting,
very
yeah.
interesting.
Huh. Karen Tumulty suggests that in America, it's the decoration of denim jackets that's where our traditional motifs shine.
There's a lot of variation. And the cowboy shirt. You have different
Cowboy
models.
shirts.
I
Yeah.
love them.
Yeah, they're nice.
I'm sure we can think of other things, but it just seems so specific, these national costumes. And the idea, I love the idea that you could have an outfit that was your outfit to wear to weddings. Just takes away the whole decision making about what you're going to wear when you get invited to a wedding.
Yeah. You don't have that problem. You can, if you meet the king, put on the folk costume. There you go.
But this is a tradition that is very specific to Norway. In Northern Europe, Norway is the only country where a very large part of the population have folk costumes, and therefore the crafts are kept alive because you have all these stores where you can go and have a bespoke folk costume from the region made. And that folk costume will have silver in it. It will have embroidery in it. It will have knitting in it. It will have felting in it, maybe. All the materials are made in Norway. There's a big industry of bespoke in Norway, thanks to this. If you go to Denmark, the only place I know where they have a tradition for folk costumes is Færø. You may have heard of Krista Seifert, does the knitting festival. Well, her island has these very strong traditions of folk costume wearing that kind of seem very Norwegian to us when we see them, because they wear them as well as we do here in our country.
But Norway and Denmark has been was one country once, so we have a lot of influence from each other.
Yeah. But then if you look in Sweden, it's more maybe if you're in a folk music kind of environment, which is very small. It's not a spread thing that, or maybe if you're part of the royal family, but other than that, it's not widespread in the population as it is here. Here in Norway, 80% of women own a folk costume, which they either inherit or they have bespoke. So when we were going to get our folk costume, it was very important to both of us to select a region in Norway where we have connections, because we are thinking that one day somebody will inherit them and wear them, because that they get passed from generation to generation.
So interesting. So in the comments, people are pointing out things like quilts, and cowboy boots and embroidered chambray shirts. You know, it's just, once you start thinking about quilts.
The quilts you have in America is amazing.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
They're beautiful. We have so many books about American quilts.
Really? Well, it's I do think a lot of them have a lot of meaning built into them. Very
They do,
a lot of them, and are much more than just a bed covering. And then there's the whole art quilt thing, which is totally another topic entirely. So, all right. So Dickies, yes. I'm going to make a Dickie after I make my hat. I'm pretty sure. I'm feeling it. This is going to be good.
Since we aren't able to share the field guide with you to screen share, I just want to encourage everybody at some point to click over to MDK, because we have gorgeous pictures of these gorgeous knits, and you know,
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah. Dream comes true. Just in time. So yeah, the MDK, I mean, we're going to be featuring these projects all season long, and there's so much to see. But you know, if we could click through here for just a second, in case you guys don't have your field guide yet,